All right, everybody, welcome to our topic here, the rationale of research. So we're going to look at some of the methods of collecting research, how psychologists analyze research, and why they do so. So that's kind of our discussion for today. So our objectives and standards are to understand the different methods of research and to compare and contrast the different types of psychological research. And take a moment there to read the standards, please, if you would. And our desired result. How do psychologists conduct good research? We have a couple of vocabulary words here. So sample. Sample is out of a total population, a relatively small group used for investigation. Naturalistic observation. A psychologist studies a subject in a natural environment without interfering. We'll talk more about that in the lesson here. Case study, a type of research method that involves intensive investigation of one or more participants. Survey is a method of research where information is obtained by asking many individuals a fixed set of questions. Some more vocab. A longitudinal study is is collected for individuals over many years and compared to observe characteristics change or if they remain the same. Sorry if there was a typo there. Cross-sectional study is data collected on individuals of different ages and compared to see the differences among the groups. Correlation, measure of relationship between two variables or sets of data. A hypothesis is an educated guess about a relationship between two variables. And just final vocabulary here, variable, behaviors and conditions that are subject to change. Experimental group, individuals that are exposed to the independent variable, and the control group is the individuals that are not exposed to the independent variable. So gathering information. Psychologists gather information carefully and systematically. Similar to taking a poll about what movie to go see with friends, psychologists work the same way. So you might ask your friends, hey, there's these three movies out there, what movie would you like to see? Maybe two friends say this movie, you say that movie, and another friend says another movie. And maybe you all agree, okay, since you kind of all voted that and completed the poll, that you're going to go see movie A. And this is how psychologists tend to do research too, okay? We'll talk about a survey in a little bit. Now, over the years, psychologists have developed ways of gathering and analyzing data as well. So decisions. Research begins by asking a limited question about a certain topic, such as why does a baby, cry when its mother takes its rattle away? And then maybe the baby smiles and laughs again when the rattle is given back. We might ask why that is, or maybe why one baby cries when the rattle is taken away and another baby does not cry. That might be a question for psychologists. Ways to achieve this question or topic can vary for different psychologists. For example, social psychologists may use an experiment to understand group pressure. A psychologist that's interested in personality may use case studies, and we'll talk more about, again, some of these different research methods as we go on here. So try a sample. Imagine a psychologist wants to know how the desire for college affects high school seniors and juniors. I'm sure many of you are in that position right now, looking at maybe higher education or maybe potential jobs or whatever the case may be, trade school, whatever, military options. But imagine that. So think about a psychologist wants to know how the desire for college or something else affects high school seniors and juniors. Now, it would be impossible to study or ask every junior and senior in the country their opinion. Now, we could do it, but it would probably take the psychologist a long time, and people would graduate and move on. Their views may change. So what the psychologist will do is select a small group of individuals from the population of high school juniors and seniors, and that's what I have here. So let's say our blue circle here is the population of high school juniors and seniors. What the psychologist would do is not interview everyone in that population, but take a small sample in the red circle here and interview them. Samples must be representative of the population of the sample. If the sample does not include those things, it is considered non-representative. So, for example, we can't include freshmen and sophomores in the sample if we want to know how high school seniors and juniors feel about college or their life after high school. We can't throw, 8th graders into the mix. That would ruin the sample. So, good sampling. There are a couple of things that have to occur for good sampling for it to be a good sample. First off, there could be random sampling. Every person has an equal opportunity of being selected. So if you look at the picture here, you'll see there's about 12 individuals, all of different backgrounds or races, male, female, whatever the case may be, and everybody has the an equal opportunity to be selected. Okay, there's no real rhyme or reason to why they're being selected, so that's good. We want to have random sampling. We kind of just pick random people and use them for the sample. Stratified sampling is choosing individuals from various subgroups. So, for example, let's say the blue are students who are athletes. If we're talking about our high school seniors and juniors, let's say that the blue individuals there are student athletes. We'll say the red group is maybe students who struggle maybe academically a little bit, let's just say, or maybe do well in one subject and not well in another. Maybe they're good in writing but not in math. And then our green subjects down there in the green group there, let's say maybe those are students who aren't really involved in any activities or clubs or whatever. I'm just kind of making this up as I go along. But again, you have different subgroups, and you look at those subgroups and break them up into subgroups to kind of, figure out your sampling. So let's talk about different methods of research. One of the methods of research psychologists use is naturalistic observation. So psychologists will use different methods to accomplish their goals. They may want to know how people or animals behave naturally, and naturalistic observation will allow them to do this. What this means is they can observe people or animals in their natural environment without disturbing them. So we may see, going back to our high school juniors and seniors, a psychologist might observe students in a cafeteria at lunchtime and see how high school seniors and juniors interact with each other, maybe what they're talking about. Are they talking about their plans for the weekend, or are they talking about, potential colleges or applying to colleges or things like that? So they don't interfere. That's important. They kind of just observe, and they kind of take notes about what's going on. Now, a case study. A case study involves intensive study of a person or group, and it can include long-term observations that include diaries, interviews, tests, and these can be a powerful research tool because you're talking to the same, not necessarily the same group of people, but the certain group of people over a certain period of time. A case study, however, cannot prove or disprove something, so that's kind of a problem with that. It can't prove or disprove something, but it can help build material that can lead to further hypotheses. So we might say, okay, well, I talked to this group of high school seniors in 2018, and they said this is what they kind of did for colleges. I talked to high school seniors in 2019, and I looked to see and compare, if my hypothesis was correct or not about high school seniors and juniors. A survey. You probably know what a survey is. You probably may have completed one or know what it is. But it's a practical way to gather data on a large group of people. Surveys can involve questions, interviews, or both. They might say, hey, tell us what we, they give, maybe you go to the food store and they give you a survey and say, hey, how does this, brand of ice cream taste? And you fill it out. Chocolate tastes good, strawberries okay, vanilla's not so good, or different surveys. And these questions or interview, or the question or interview cannot be modified. Can be modified if the person does not understand. So, we can clarify. Questions can all be the same, and they can take less time to administer. But the problem with a survey is the good thing about a survey is it can also reduce influence by the researcher. Longitudinal study. A psychologist studies the same group of people at regular times over a period of years. Now, the goal is to determine if their behaviors and or feelings have changed. Now, this can be time-consuming and precarious because participants can disappear in the middle of the study or not want to respond anymore. However, it can also show behaviors and feelings over time. So let's take a look at this. Let's say a psychologist talks to child A in 2004 when the child is 2 years old. The psychologist then talks to the child again 2 years later in 2006 when the child is 4 years old, same thing for 6 years old, and same thing for 8 years old. And again, our goal is to see, how their feelings and emotions changed. Do they still want to be a fireman or a princess when they're 2 years old? Maybe at 8 years old, they might not want to be a princess or a fireman anymore. Maybe they want to be a doctor or a lawyer, or maybe they want to be a teacher or something like that. So again, we try to see how those feelings and behaviors have changed over time with a certain individual. Cross-sectional studies. These are when individuals are separated into groups based on their age. You'll see here year of study 2004. We have Group A or Cohort A 2-year-olds, Cohort B 6-year-olds, and Cohort C 8-year-olds. Now they are randomly sampled and questioned, interviewed, or observed at the same time. Not necessarily in the same room, but in the same time, in the same year. So we might ask 2-year-olds if they look at an elephant, what do they see? And the 2-year-old might say, it's an elephant, it's gray, it's big, something like that. A 6-year-old may say, oh, it's big, it's gray, it has tusk, things like that. And maybe an 8-year-old might say, oh, it's an elephant, it's big, it's gray, it has tusk, it lives in the jungles typically, some live in Africa, some live in Asia. So again, we try to see, what their behaviors and information is. Now, cross-sectional studies are less expensive than longitudinal studies and also less time-consuming because we can always find 2-year-olds, hopefully, always find a bunch of 6-year-olds or 8-year-olds. It doesn't have to be the same group like we did with longitudinal where it's the same person. These could be 2-year-olds from, different time spans. So research and comparing data. Psychologists may want to just observe people and animals and record the data. Like we said, the high school seniors and juniors eating lunch, they might take some notes. Hey, this is what they talked about, and I'm done. Others want to compare the research in relationship to examine different observations. They might want to look at, what did high school seniors and juniors in 2018 say against high school seniors and juniors in 2019? What were kind of their different viewpoints? Now, we have two types of correlations. A positive correlation could be higher intelligence and higher grades. Now, this isn't always true, but typically people who may have higher grades typically tend to maybe show a little bit higher intelligence. So that would be a positive thing. We expect that. If you have high grades, we expect that you have a higher intelligence. Again, not always true, but typically true. Now, a negative correlation would be something that we don't expect to happen. For example, a tennis player practicing for hours and hours on a day, and they're not getting any better. They keep increasing the number of errors or mistakes they make. We'd say, well, this person's practicing a lot, why aren't they getting any better? That would be a negative thing. So positives, we expect that to happen. Negative is we don't expect that to happen. So experiments. An experiment is different than a research method. I want to make that clear. A research method is completely separate from an experiment. Psychologists can control a situation in an experiment. In research methods, they kind of just observe and record that data, okay? Or they interact, they ask questions. But in an experiment, they control what happens to that person or doesn't happen to that person. They can also decrease the influence of outside variables. So in experiments, we have a hypothesis, an educated guess about the outcome of the experiment. We have independent variables and dependent variables which impact experiments. Maybe I give you this, this test, and, I tell you this test will help you get a job, and I give the same test to another person. I say it won't help them get a job. How does that interact with people? That's an experiment. Does one person do better than another? We'd have to see. An experiment, so those who are exposed to the independent variable and the experimental group. The control group is not exposed, so the control group might not be given that test or a certain plant to try or food to try, and the other group is the experimental group, and we see if maybe that impacts them. We decide in the conclusion if the independent variable had an impact, and the results must be duplicated to avoid any possible flaws before conclusions are made. So we have to run the experiment again to make sure that it is true. Alright, our closure. How do psychologists conduct good research? Think about sampling, think about different methods of research, think about comparing data, and that'll help you answer your question. Alright, make sure to include this in your chart. I hope you have a great rest of your day or night. As usual, ask me for questions or any comments, and hopefully talk to you guys soon.